pay
killer batch
for,
of songs
you know,
there.
all the
That last
infrastructure
one
upgrades,
is a
infrastructure
Cheech and Chong
needs.
track.
Yeah, kind of make some fixes and
what a
stuff.
fucking riff on
Laura,
it,
Yeah,
huh?
definitely.
Laura, 10
Anyways,
seconds.
this
Is this
is,
really
the
ever
Right and
not
Easy
going to happen in
podcast,
New York
and,
City, or
this
who knows?
next track is
We don't
from
know.
one of my favorite
The governor hasn't
bars
said
over
that
here,
it's
a band
totally
called
over, but
Paralyzed Man.
she indefinitely delayed it.
The track is
It
called That Much
is
Closer,
limping along
which I
on
believe
life
is not
support
out
right
yet,
now. But the
but
blowback
it will
that
be
she's
soon.
receiving from some people in the legislature and
Get your bong
advocates,
ready.
I don't know. We'll see. The next couple of weeks should be critical.
All right, we'll be watching. Laura Namias, New York politics reporter here at Bloomberg News in studio. Michelle Kasky, reporter at Bloomberg News, out there on the streets with the latest on congestion pricing. That's what's happening, or maybe the era of not having congestion pricing in New York City. But we're coming back with what is actually happening in the United States. We're talking nuclear power too. That's coming up next.
Hey, before we get to that, though, we're checking the latest world and national news. We got Amy Morris, who's Bloomberg Dynamic News in Washington, D.C. Hey, Amy.
Hey, Tim, world, national, and space news. Boeing Starliner capsule docking with the International Space Station.
We have confirmation of contact and capture of NASA's Boeing crew flight test and Starliner aboard the International Space Station.
This is a key moment for Boeing's Starliner. It suffered numerous delays, technical difficulties, and setbacks, pushing the mission back by 7 years. And SpaceX's mega rocket also launched today and successfully completed its 400th flight. Starship and Super Heavy booster lifting off from a facility in Texas for SpaceX before a controlled splash in the Indian Ocean about an hour later. Steve Bannon, a longtime advisor for former President Donald Trump, was ordered to start serving a 4-month-long jail sentence by July 1st for contempt of Congress after his appeal of a 2022 conviction failed.
There's not a prison built or jail built that will ever shut me up.
A jury found Bannon guilty of contempt for refusing to testify and hand over documents to the Congressional Committee investigating the January 6, 2021 Capitol riot. And President Biden praised NATO in a speech commemorating the 80th anniversary of D-Day. He spoke to a global audience, giving praise to the soldiers who lost their lives in the invasion and praised the North Alliance after the war that we Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it. With Bloomberg News now. I'm Morris. This is Bloomberg. Steve Bannon, a longtime advisor to former President Donald Trump, was ordered to start serving a 4-month jail sentence by July 1st for contempt of Congress after his appeal of a 2022 conviction failed. Bannon spoke later outside that courtroom.
All of this is about one thing. This is about shutting down the MAGA movement, shutting down grassroots conservatives, shutting down President Trump.
A jury found Bannon guilty of contempt for refusing to testify and hand over documents to the congressional committee investigating the January 6, 2021 Capitol riot. World leaders are in Normandy, France, marking 80 years since the Allies stormed the beaches and turned the tide against the Nazis. It is a chance for those allies, including President Biden, to reaffirm their support as Europe faces its biggest conflict since World War II and Russia's war in Ukraine. Biden says abandoning Ukraine is not an option. Global news 24 hours a day, whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris, and back to Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Tim Stenovec.
All right, Amy Morris, thank you so much. Well, we do want to get to one of the most read stories on the Bloomberg. It is our one more thing to do. It has to do with On Holding. They're the Swiss sneaker maker. Full disclosure, I have talked to their CFO, also their co-CEO, same person. I own On Holding's sneakers.
You went out and bought them after that interview.
I actually did.
Yeah,
I paid
that.
for them completely. I kind of love the experience. And I really like them, although we did have a little bit of a debate. I'm really sorry, but like my daughter makes fun of them. She thinks they look like old people's sneakers. And I really take offense to that.
Okay, that's actually a perfect segue to what
I
we're talking
know.
about. Is she going to have her
I
mind
think I look
changed
kinda cool
because
in them.
of a superstar who signed a big partnership with them?
We're talking about Zendaya. She is, of course, Spider-Man's girlfriend, if you watch the
She's
Marvel
also been in
series.
Euphoria. That
She's,
was
first
huge.
of all, actor, singer.
Dune, she was in Dune.
She was in Dune. She is a style icon. I mean, you always see her on the red carpets, and she looks pretty amazing. And she dates Spider-Man in real life. So anyway, just going to put that out there, Tom Holland. Anyway, so...
I didn't know that. I thought she was like in Spider-Man.
welcome to People Magazine.
Oh, yeah, I did not know this. I guess you learned something.
The
from
Bloomberg
Carol every day.
version. On Holding, signing a partnership with Zendaya, adding marketing heft to a fast-growing brand that's already partly owned by tennis great Roger Federer. It's really an interesting company, but they're basically looking to broaden their customer base and appeal to younger and fashion-oriented consumers. The U.S. market, though, is a big one for them.
Yeah, it is. And a year after Roger Federer joined onto the company unveiled a line of tennis shoes, beginning with the Roger. It's an all-white tennis-inspired sneaker made with faux leather, featuring On's patented cushioning technology instead of the typical heavy rubber sole that you'd find with a tennis shoe.
I'm just going to say, they're
Okay,
really
say it.
comfortable. I love them. I bought them before I went overseas to do some traveling with my daughter, and she, of course, just made fun from the get-go. We're sitting like on a bus in London, or we're riding a bus, and like there was another couple whose husband had a pair on, younger, and the wife was making fun of them as well. And my daughter just looks at me and she's like, see? All I'm going to tell you is I think they're super comfortable.
I think they're cool, too.
And I think they look okay. I'm just going to put that out there. All right, for those who are watching on television, the close is coming your way. We've got a few hours, though, to go on Bloomberg Business Week.
Yeah, we're going to, of course, talk about the rate cuts that we've seen in recent days. And also, robo-taxi, anyone? We check in with Ed Ludlow, who recently was the first journalist to ride in Zook's robo-taxi. That's next on Business Week.
This is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine, plus global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Tim Stenovec on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, everybody, Bloomberg Business Week continuing on radio, YouTube, and Bloomberg Originals. It's my Friday. It's your Friday's Eve.
Yeah, it's the week.
It's the week?
It's a week. You know, when you have
is
a
a week.
full week after a shortened holiday
It's hard.
week, feels like a long week.
It's hard.
Yeah.
Which is why we are looking forward
This
to the
is,
Fed meeting next week, because that Wednesday is a little bit easier for
Not
us.
that I'm keeping track, but this is your second show that you've anchored this week, right? Second and a half?
Monday, Tuesday,
Half
I did
Tuesday.
half of Tuesday.
Yeah.
I was
Here Thursday.
working Wednesday. Here,
Okay.
yeah, and
Okay.
then I'm out tomorrow.
Just so you know, you can push back on Romaine when he gives you a hard time.
No, I can't
In the
apparently.
simulcast, okay?
I was working yesterday.
Okay.
Traveling.
You were. And actually, that interview in our weekend show, one of the
Yeah.
interviews you did yesterday.
Pretty amazing. Two individuals. Hanukkah Smits of BNY Mellon and Jenny Johnson of Franklin Templeton. Man, they see a lot when it comes to the market, so we get a lot from them on everything that's going on in asset management.
Okay, that's a deep tease. tease for what we have coming up on our weekend program on Saturday morning. Yeah. Before we get to that, though, let's talk about rates, because yesterday was Canada. Today it's the ECB. We get the details on the central bank rate cuts ahead of tomorrow's key jobs report and next week's Fed meeting.
We're also going to talk about the strings attached when it comes to $121 million that was donated to Bowling Green State University. You might recall this story about a month ago from our own Janet Lauren. We're going to actually check in with her and also talk about the president of the college. We're going to get into what it means for his institution.
Also, we check in on the business of private aviation with the founder and president of the private aircraft broker, Par Avion.
Yeah, talking a little bit about private aviation. I love doing that. Jared Dillian is going to be back with them. Always entertaining. We're going to talk about NVIDIA. Bubble or no bubble?
He thinks it's a bubble. I mean, he thinks this thing is Cisco. Well, I think people are going to want to hear this. He says this is Cisco back in the year 2000.
It's pretty amazing. There was some interesting stuff on Twitter, too, yesterday, as it's now, what's the market cap of this one?
$3 trillion.
$3 trillion. All right, lots to come, folks. We're going to get a little bit more serious, we promise, over the next couple of hours. Let's get a check, though, on the trade and your top business stories. Here is Charlie Pellet.
Thank you very much. NVIDIA right now down 1.7%. The Dow higher, S&P, NASDAQ. They are both in the red. Going to be very interesting to see how things shake out. We've got just about 58 minutes to go ahead of the closing bell. S&P lower, little change now, down 2 points, a drop there of just under 0.1%. The Dow up 77, up 0.2. NASDAQ down 20, a decline of 0.1%. 10-year 4.27%, 2-year 4.71%. Gold up 0.7%, 23.71 the ounce, and West Texas Intermediate crude up 2.1%, 75.62 a barrel. Bottom line, stocks little changed ahead of the jobs report tomorrow. Veronica Clark is director of Citi Research at Citigroup Global Markets, and she sees a Fed rate cut still on for July.
Honestly, I think the bar for bad labor market data for the Fed to be cutting sooner than the market is pricing is pretty low. Tomorrow, we think we're going to see 140,000 payrolls, which is a further slowing, obviously, from the slowing we had in April. The level of job growth, that's still a pretty healthy level, but it's the trend that's concerning. I think the unemployment rate can go to 4.0% tomorrow. That's the Fed's end-of-year forecast, and we're hitting that sooner than they expected.
Citigroup's Veronica Clark. Instacart has announced a new $500 million share repurchase program. The third round of buybacks of the grocery delivery company is authorized since September. Right now, Instacart up by 8.5%. Again, recapping, S&P down 2, drop there of just under 0.1%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Thank you so much for that update, Charlie Pellet. Do appreciate it. Well, today the central bank the European Central Bank, I should say, delivered on its promise to cut interest rates, but left investors looking to where policy is headed next by also saying it will take longer for inflation to reach 2%. Indeed, bond traders have escalated rate cut bets in the past week, emboldened by a slew of softer than forecast U.S. economic data, the Bank of Canada's decision to ease monetary policy, and then the expectations and the follow-through that the ECB, Carol, would be the next to cut rates.
There's a lot going on when it comes to global central bankers. For more, we're joined by Bloomberg News rates reporter Michael McKenzie. He joins us in New York City. Michael, good to have you back with us. There is a lot going on with global central bankers. First up, your kind of top-of-mind thought when it comes to maybe some of potentially the differences we're going to see among global central bankers and the implications of that.
Hey, Carol. Yes, it's been a big week, and I guess the news here in the U.S. Treasury market is we're back to pretty much pricing in 2 rate cuts for this year. It wasn't that long ago we were flirting with just 1 cut for this year. So we've had a really good rally, and I think tomorrow is when we get, the first real definite sign of some chunky data in the payroll report, and that will determine whether the rally we're seeing can continue. I mean, a very weak number, you could actually see July come back into focus for rate cuts. At the moment, the market's only pricing in 4 basis points a cut. So really, the market thinks at best you're going to get the first cut in a sort of September, November timeframe. So a lot rests on the data tomorrow. And then, of course, inflation comes out Wednesday morning, just as the Fed is putting to bed its outlook for rates and the economy and also inflation.
So what shifted so much, Mike, in recent weeks?
Sorry, Tim.
What shifted in recent weeks to sort of get us back to a rate cut expectation of 2?
It's just been a steady drip of slightly weaker data. Particularly, we saw this week with jolts. We've seen, manufacturing ISM not particularly good. Personal income spending disappointed. some moderation in some of the inflation measures that we've seen lately. So I think it's just a combination of that. And I think there's a sense in the market. You have people like, we just played the piece there from the Citigroup economists, but they, along with JP Morgan, are the two big banks still calling for a July rate cut because they think this is a Fed that will get ahead of any potential slowing in the labor market. Whereas you have other street economists who've taken off the July rate cut in May and have pushed it out to September, thinking, well, actually, this is a Fed that's still going to take its time because it wants to make sure inflation is coming down. So what you've got really here is, I think, a pretty bifurcated market. You've got those people who think they can move early, and you've got those who are saying, no, they're going to hold the line. And it's interesting looking at the ECB today because a lot of people said, they sort of define this as a hawkish cut. So the ECB cuts, but then says, we're going to raise our inflation forecasts, which means they then take off any further rate cuts in July off the table.
Hey.
And so you're sort of putting yourselves in a box when you say, hey, we're going to cut in June, which is what the ECB did last month. And now you're saying, no, we're not going to cut next month. But what happens if the data comes in slow or weaker in Europe? So it's a tough time, I think, for a lot of people in the market.
All right, we're going to leave it on that note. We know there's a story that you've got about rising U.S. debt load. I want to come back to you on that on another day, if we may, because it's something that came up big time at Milken, and I just had a discussion that's going to be in our weekend broadcast, just coming back from the BNY Mellon Pershing Insight event, where U.S. debt was certainly top of mind, and it increasingly is. So, Michael, we promise we will come back to you. Michael McKenzie, he is our rates reporter here at Bloomberg News, joining us on Zoom in New York City. This is Bloomberg.
I'll give a little bit of my love to you.
Well, Carol, you might recall the story from Bloomberg's Janet Lauren last month about Bob and Ellen Thompson, a couple in their 90s who are donating $121 million to expand a scholarship program at Bowling Green State University in Ohio.
Right? Great.
Yeah,
Sounds
great.
incredible. Absolutely. There are, however, some strings attached to make sure recipients earn degrees. According to the terms, 80% of the students receiving support must graduate within 4 years. Otherwise, the public school, Tim, there has to foot the bill for each extra semester of tuition.
We've got with us Rodney Roger, the president of Bowling Green State University, joining us from Bowling Green, Ohio, as well as our own Bloomberg News higher education reporter, Janet Lauren, who joins us here in the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio. Janet, I do want to start with you. We know the story, we've talked about it, but I do want you to remind everyone about the donation and give us sort of the nitty-gritty of the strings that are attached here.
Well, what I found remarkable about this donation, there were several things. This 90-year-old couple had met at Bowling Green in the 50s, I believe, graduated. Long story short, Bob Thompson entered the business of an uncle, a road paving business, at the time when Dwight Eisenhower decided he needed roads paved in the United States, Interstate Highway
We still
Act.
do, but anyway.
You know what they say? There's gold in the streets.
There really is.
Interstate Highway Act,
Yeah.
and Bob's business was quite successful. And then they sold it in 1999 for over $400 million, and they became noteworthy because they gave about $100 million to their employees, often to help them start retirement funds, which is also amazing. And at the same time, they heard from their alma mater, Bowling Green, that they just hadn't had a relationship with in almost 50 years.
Yeah.
And at a football game, this relationship was rekindled. University of Michigan crushed Bowling Green, but there was a nice relationship that came out of it. And they started donating money. And eventually they decided they wanted to create this scholarship program to help kids finish schools and in 4 years. And Bob Thompson pressure tested this program. That was a term he used in business just to make sure the school could handle getting this huge influx of money and to make sure that kids could finish. And then over time, he had some great investments. They were actually bond investments. And they had more money, and he met with President Rogers and wanted to hear about his long-term goals with the school. Would he be sticking around? And they decided they wanted to give more money. It has to be spent within the next 14, I think, years, get these kids through. It won't be an endowment. It has to be spent.
Interesting.
And the school has to match it. And if the kids don't graduate within 4 years, Bowling Green will pay the tuition for each semester for the students who are still sticking around after 4 years.
Well, Rodney Rogers is with us. So, Rodney, first up, just what this means for the school, the direction of your school, the future of your school.
Well, this gift is certainly transformational to Bowling Green, but more importantly, it's transformational to the over 6,000 students that it's going to serve over this next decade plus years. It allows us to serve so students from modest income families who want to get that college degree, minimize their debt, and be prepared to go out and do some amazing things in our communities. So it means a lot, especially to our students.
So why is it so hard for kids to finish college? There was a statistic like only 62% graduate within 4 years.
You know, the challenge that we have today as the cost of education has increased because of decline in investment from many states across the nation, and there is an escalating cost. So many students, especially students coming from more modest income families, they work 2-3 jobs. They need to borrow. They worry, as we all do, about the level of debt. And so I think all of those sorts of things kind of get in the way of completing college in a timely way. So that's one reason. This program, which is really a 3-way partnership. So as Janet had mentioned, the Thompson Foundation is providing some funding. The university needs to find ways to match that funding. It is not a free college. Bob and Ellen made it clear this isn't free college. We want the students to have some skin in the game. So while the majority of tuition is covered by this scholarship program, there is about 10% that is covered by the student. And the student has to do 20 hours of community service each year to pay it forward. So everybody's got a little bit of skin in the game here. As Janet mentioned, if they don't graduate in 4 years, the university's on the hook to cover the tuition until they do graduate. So we are highly motivated. The student is highly motivated, and we certainly have found this to be very effective, increasing that graduation rate during this pressure testing period to nearly 90% four-year graduation.
I love the skin in the game. I think it's really smart.
So the students also get a coach to work with them as part of the requirements. And how does coaching help these students finish within 4 years, perhaps finding jobs or internships or making sure they get the right classes so they can finish in 4 years?
Yeah, an initiative we've started here at the university called Life Design, and it's an initiative that's really available to all the students, but the Thompson Scholars absolutely must take advantage of it because it's part of the requirement. What it does is, using design thinking principles, we help students navigate, we empower the student to navigate this collegiate experience as they transition here. Many of our students here at Bowling Green are still first-gen students. 35% of our student body is first-generation students. And those students especially sometimes need a little bit extra support on how to navigate. But what we do is give them the toolbox to navigate it using design thinking principles. And a big part of that is prototyping, beginning to think about the kind of life you want to lead, the kind of career you want to lead or to be involved in, and how do you prototype those experiences, which is all about internships and co-ops. Right. And so it feeds nicely into the transition from college to life as well.
President Rogers, what's the typical 4-year graduation rate at the school right now? How long does it typically take students to graduate?
So our 4-year graduation rate is closer to 50%.
So that's going to be some serious work to ensure that these students do graduate in 4 years.
Yes.
What are you budgeting in terms of students not being able to do that?
Well, from a total dollar amount, we assume there's probably 5% of this group of students that we may need to have some extra skin in the game. But I'll tell you, Tim, what we've learned, honestly, the pressure testing of this, and this is why we are willing to be held accountable for this type of philanthropy. And that's what I think is a key story here. This is very much about accountable philanthropy. And why we are willing to be accountable is during the pressure test, we found that we can act, if we help take away the financial challenge the student has, they want to graduate in 4 years or less because they want to begin their career.
I do have a question, though, and I'm wondering in terms of, is this going to change like the admissions process of who you accept because of the importance of making sure these kids get through in 4 years?
Well, we are a selective admission university to begin with. So we only, we're admitting students who we believe can be successful at the university. So they have hit an appropriate kind of academic admission standard where we believe they can be successful here. This program basically takes away the majority of the financial need, though. And by taking that away, students can focus on their collegiate experience.
And how does it help in terms of figuring out what you want to do, what is the class path, what courses to take, so you're not wasting time in your major?
And President Rogers, we only have about 30 seconds left.
Real quick, the Life Design Initiative, from the first time they step on campus, they meet with a design coach, they lay out what we call the Falcon flight plan, which is basically, we're the Falcons, that's our mascot. The flight plan really takes them through that 4 years, and they learn how to navigate that from day one. To be thinking about what's the prize at the end.
We're looking forward to checking back with you and Janet on this as these students progress. Rodney Rogers, he's the president of Bowling Green State University, along with Bloomberg News higher education reporter Janet Lauren. Our thanks to both of you. Still to come, rockets and robo-taxis with our own Ed Ludlow on the other side. This is Bloomberg Business Week.
Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We have got the Dow higher, the S&P, NASDAQ lower right now. Little change on the S&P 500 index. Stocks and bonds losing steam on the eve of the jobs report tomorrow morning that will help shape the outlook for the Federal Reserve's next steps. Here's where we stand. S&P is at 53.49, down 4, drop of less than 0.1%. The Dow up 74, up 0.2%, while NASDAQ is down 29, a decline of 0.2%. 10-year yield 4.27%, with the 2-year 4.71%. Spot gold up 0.8%, 23.74 the ounce, and West Texas Intermediate crude oil up 2.1%, 75.60 for a barrel of WTI. Wall Street is looking ahead to tomorrow morning's jobs report. The consensus, 185,000 new jobs with an unemployment rate of 3.9%. Yelena Shulyateva is senior U.S. economist at BNP Paribas.
If we see gradual increases in the unemployment rate, and what we expect is around slightly above 4% by the end of the year, that's not a concern. The concern would be to see an increase in the unemployment rate from new layoffs. It's not only about the level, it's about what's inside, about the details.
Yelena Shulyateva, senior U.S. economist at BNP Paribas. Big lot shares plunging after the retailer reported a bigger loss than expected. Right now, we do have shares of Big Lots down 18.5%. Lululemon Athletica heading the other direction after the athletic clothing company boosted its EPS guidance for the year. Lulu up now by about 4.1%. Also, after earnings, we have got Victoria's Secret shares. They are trading lower by 6.1%. Again, recapping, stocks trading mixed. S&P down 5 now, little change, down less than 0.1%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, thank you so much, Charlie Pellet. We promised we'd talk about it. Planes, trade, it's automobiles, rockets, and robo-taxis. Lots going on in that world today. I'm going to go through a few of these, Carol, okay?
Yeah.
Despite an initial hiccup when a handful of thrusters failed, Boeing's space taxi finally docked with the ISS, bringing the spacecraft's first 2 passengers to the orbiting lab as part of a crucial flight test for NASA.
Yeah. We were all kind of watching very closely. Speaking of space, SpaceX's Starship rocket earlier today blasting off to space and plunging through Earth's atmosphere for an ocean landing, notching a key objective on its 4th major test flight. So, all right, check.
Okay, back down here on Earth,
Yes.
though. The Amazon-owned Zoox robotaxi. Our next guest was the first journalist to hitch a ride on one of the funny-looking vehicles recently in Las Vegas. Lots to talk about with Ed Ludlow, the co-host of Bloomberg Technology on Bloomberg TV. He joins us from our San Francisco bureau. Ed, is it fair for me to describe the Zoox robotaxi as funny-looking?
It's really funny-looking. I mean, people call it all kinds of things. I call it like a shuttle, like a bug-eyed, funky-looking, boxy shuttle. And, you know, all the listener needs to know is the basics, is it has no steering wheel, it has no pedals, and inside there are 4 inward-facing seats, and its doors open kind of like an airport monorail, if that's easy to understand.
Yeah, totally.
Go Google it.
We're looking at pictures of it right now on YouTube, if you're watching our broadcast on YouTube or Bloomberg Originals. Ed, I got to ask, though, I mean, you have been in a Waymo's self-driving vehicle many, many times.
A lot,
I mean, this is the way you commuted a lot. I know that. You see them all over San Francisco. How is this different?
So it's different because it's purpose-built. It's designed as a robo-taxi. It is not a consumer car that's retrofitted. And that's really important. My experience was 5 miles in the real world, actual public roads in traffic on the outskirts of Las Vegas. 3-lane roads, 4-lane roads, single-lane roads, highways, multiple lane changes, traffic lights. And the experience is kind of disconcerting because the vehicle's bidirectional. It has an electric drive unit at either end, so it doesn't really matter which way it's facing. But when you're inside it, irrespective which of the inward-facing seats you sit in, you actually can't see out of the front or back window by design. The headrests block it. And the point is, you're supposed to be in there not worried about the world around you. And I have to say, of all the autonomous driving experiences I've had, which are many, it was the smoothest by some distance.
And yet, were you worried at all not being able to kind of see?
So our audience has been super engaged with me about this all day long, and one person posted on X that I look incredibly anxious in the video throughout. I would just say that it's disconcerting. Like, you guys may or may not have been robo-taxis, but like the Waymo or the Cruise, and I've talked a lot about my use of Tesla full self-driving. It's very like jerky. It can be kind of like not the way a normal human drives. And how I would describe my experience in the Zoox is it was like a human would drive. It accelerated and decelerated and braked and changed lanes smoothly like a good human driver.
Purpose-built, as you mentioned. What about the technology that it uses versus the tech of these cars that have been retrofitted? Or ones like your own Tesla that uses cameras for self-driving?
So the reason that I found Zoox so interesting and I wanted to go and do this case study is because of Tesla. Tesla's going to show us its robo-taxi on August 8th.
Supposedly.
Supposedly. And our understanding is that it is also purpose-built, a vehicle, as Americans say, that is deliberately designed as a robo-taxi, not a retrofitted consumer car. But Zoox has been super consistent on this. Zoox has not done what Tesla, Waymo, and Cruise has done, which is to try and offer consumers an early taste of self-driving through a consumer vehicle. They have said the only way to do this is, one, a purpose-built vehicle, and then the sensors around the outside are really important. On each corner of the rectangular Zoox is a LiDAR, radar, thermal or temperature sensor, and cameras. And that completely contrasts with Tesla's approach, which is a camera-only system, because cameras are the cheapest sensors. So in other words, the Zoox kit is really expensive, but they reckon they can run these things like most of the 24-hour day and amortize that cost in the form of an autonomous ride-hailing service. Imagine Uber or Lyft, but with a purpose-built robo-taxi and no humans.
Are we ready for this? Are streets ready for this?
So here's what's kind of interesting is I would describe this industry as a kind of tortoise and the hare scenario, where Zoox has been the tortoise. They've also been super shy. Like, they are the anti-Elon Musk. They don't shout about what they're doing. So the reason they chose Las Vegas is, like, when you fly to Vegas, I know from experience, you're not really renting a car. You're jumping in an Uber Lyft, or you're getting a chauffeur in your big Chevy Suburban, and you're going to the Palazzo, or wherever you like to go, right? So that's a really good test market for them. And they have the authorization to do that, and they're very likely to get to the Las Vegas Strip by the end of this year or beginning of next year. So it's real in that sense. It's one test market, but they've been under the radar, and now they're actually doing it.
Did it feel to you as safe as being in a Waymo vehicle? Just from the perspective of, like, this thing's actually was built to be a car, not built to be sort of a short-distance transporter.
So a little inside scoop for you guys on your show. Just before we were going to set out on the journey, there was a massive traffic light failure on many of the roads in that area of Las Vegas. So the Zoox execs were like, we are not letting you go in the robotaxi. We're not going to let you out until it's fixed. Because they were worried about how it would handle it. And so when I got in, I was like, God, like, what should I make of that? But I was sat next to Jesse Levinson, who's one of the co-founders, and I was basically like, look, if he gets in it and he's accompanying me, he knows it's safe, I feel safe too.
Yeah, unbelievable. I think it's interesting, right? And I don't know whether it's a case of we becoming comfortable with the idea of this, right? And not having kind of your traditional driver. I don't know how much of it is that, or how much of it is it also just making sure the infrastructure's in place to kind of deal with it.
Well, the infrastructure side of it, it's about warehouse facilities and charging. But otherwise, the whole point is it goes on public roads, and those are already there.
All right, can we go to
SpaceX? Let's go to SpaceX.
Where do you want to go?
Yeah, I want to go to SpaceX.
All right, let's go to SpaceX.
Talk a little bit about Starship, because this was a big deal.
Yeah, massive success, great progress. Starship is a two-part system where you have the spacecraft on the top and the Super Heavy booster on the bottom. They completed all of their objectives. They went to orbit. They traveled at speeds of more than 17,000 miles around the Earth. As planned, the Super Heavy booster did a controlled splash in the Gulf of Mexico, and the Starship spacecraft did a controlled re-entry into Earth's atmosphere, a controlled fall back down into the Indian Ocean, and a controlled splashdown. But it proves that the biggest and most powerful space system ever built, SpaceX can make it work. And so we just wait for the next test.
Every time I see it, I just think about how amazing it is, right? For how many, years, decades, what if rocket went off and it, that was it, like one shot. But it's just fascinating to see this come back and forth. All right, Boeing, what do we need to know about that today?
Well, mission complete so far.
Yeah.
It was scary. 5 thrusters malfunctioned. They were able to troubleshoot and bring 4 of them back. And they were able to dock at the International Space Station using the autonomous system without the 2 astronauts on board having to manually take control, which they would have been able to have done had they needed to. But the story is, this is a big moment for Boeing and a big moment for commercial space. But remember the context that Boeing is about 7 years behind schedule and about $1.5 billion over budget. And in that time, SpaceX has massively outpaced them in what it can do with space capsule design technology.
I guess just in 30 seconds, Ed, is it kind of obsolete technology at this point for Boeing?
Well, the point is that the contracts for the International Space Station, and the plan is to dump the International Space Station in the ocean in 2030. So it gives them 6 years to use the Starliner. Maybe there's a life for it in terms of our relationship with the moon, but SpaceX has kind of pulled ahead and looks the favorite to drive us forward, whatever it is that NASA and humankind want to do in space beyond that.
The contrast between SpaceX and what they're doing and then what Boeing's doing with Starliner, it's just really stark. Great. We went around the world when it comes to how we're moving stuff around. Ed Ludlow, really appreciate it. The co-host of Bloomberg Technology on Bloomberg TV. Catch him at 11 a.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg Television.
Up next, we got Drive to the Close. First up, though, we're checking the day's trade and latest world national news. We got Amy Morris in the Bloomberg 99.1 newsroom in Washington, D.C. Hey, Amy.
Hi, Tim. Boeing Starliner capsule, you guys were just talking about that. It did dock today with the International Space Station.
We have confirmation of contact and capture of NASA's Boeing crew flight test and Starliner aboard the International Space Station.
Starliner had some trouble docking the first time. Boeing and NASA worked together to figure out the problem with those failed thrusters. SpaceX's mega rocket successfully completed its 4th major test flight. Starship and its super heavy booster lifted off from SpaceX's facility in Texas before that controlled splash in the Indian Ocean. That was about an hour later. Steve Bannon, a longtime advisor to former President Donald Trump, was ordered to start serving a 4-month jail sentence by July 1st for contempt of Congress after his appeal of a 2022 conviction failed. He spoke outside the courtroom.
All of this is about one thing. This is about shutting down the MAGA movement, shutting down grassroots conservatives, shutting down President Trump.
A jury found Bannon guilty of contempt for refusing to testify and hand over documents to the congressional committee investigating the January 6, 2021 Capitol riot. An Israeli strike early today on a school sheltering displaced Palestinians in central Gaza killed more than 30 people. Local health officials say that number includes 23 women and children. The Israeli military said Hamas militants were operating from within the school. That school was run by the United Nations Agency for Palestinian Refugees. This is decision day at the Supreme Court. The justices ruled on 3 cases related to estate taxes on stocks, tribal health care, and asbestos claims. The High Court has more than 30 cases to decide before this month is over, including former President Trump's immunity claims from criminal prosecution. Global news 24 hours a day, and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris, and this is Bloomberg.
12:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long at Bloomberg. We have got stocks trading little change ahead of the jobs report. 20 minutes to go ahead of the closing bell. Let's head right over to the first word breaking news desk for today's afternoon call. Here he is, Bill Maloney.
And good afternoon, Charlie. U.S. stocks mixed in a choppy session today. The Dow is currently higher by 71 points. S&Ps are down 4, while NASDAQ declines by 0.2%. The U.S. 10-year yield falls to 4.28%. Gold is higher by 18. Oil is also climbing, and Bitcoin, but that's lower by 0.4%. Among the main 11 S&P sectors, leaders were consumer discretionary and energy. Utilities and industrials were under pressure. And leaders to the upside in the Dow, Salesforce and Nike, while Intel fell 1% and led to the downside. After earnings, Lululemon rose 4%. And in other news, GameStop soared 50% as Keith Gill scheduled his YouTube return. Wrapping things up, DocuSign reports after the bell. Live from the first breaking news desk, I'm Bill Maloney. Charlie?
Okay, we thank you very much, Bill Maloney, to hear live breaking news over your Bloomberg. Type Squawk, SQUA, on your Bloomberg terminal. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
I'm driving in my car. I turn on the radio.
How about you let me drive?
Oh, no.
Who's gonna drive you home?
Honey, please, I'll do the driving.
Drive on.
Excuse me, I want to drive.
It's
the question that drives us.
This is the Drive to the Close
That funky music will drive us till the dawn.
on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, everybody, we've got just about 18 minutes left in today's trading session. It's kind of an interesting day, I feel like. We're getting ready for the monthly jobs report tomorrow. So the economy, U.S. economy, is certainly front of mind. And this, of course, we've got a Fed meeting next week. So watching what they might say about the future rate environment to come. So I'm curious what our next guest has to say.
Yeah, Martin Escobari is co-president and head of global growth equity at the private equity firm General Atlantic. He joins us here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker studio. The firm has approximately $90 billion in assets under management. When people hear General Atlantic, they think private equity. So talk to us about the public equity side of this, the growth equity side of this.
Listen, we've been doing growth equity for 43 years. And what growth equity is late-stage venture capital. It's investing in high-growth companies. Our companies are growing 30, 40, 50% per year. Majority of them are already profitable, and we're helping them scale to the next level. We take them public, and we hold them while they're public. But the 80%, 90% of what we have in the portfolio, and the 90 billion that you talked about, is still private.
Yeah.
And about 10% of what we do is public, because we took them public most often.
How has that activity been in a higher interest rate environment over the last couple of years?
It is the worst of times and the best of times for growth equity today.
Unpack that. Why?
It's the worst of times because the IPO markets have been shut down effectively for 2 years.
Right.
That hasn't happened since 2000.
Some say it's not going to necessarily come back to the levels that we've seen, just because companies don't need to go public.
It will never be as euphoric as 2019 to 21. Just like it didn't become as euphoric as 19 to 1 since 98 to 01. It was too easy to go public. Immature companies went public.
It was messy.
It was messy and not good for the industry, not good for those companies. The IPO market will come back, but the minimum scale to be public is dramatically higher. And that is good for the industry, and that is good for the companies.
What does that mean? In other words, you mean like profitability metrics? Like that's
predictability, profitability, and a minimum market cap. In our view, the idea you could be a successful publicly traded company with a market cap of under $1 billion, it's not consistent with the world today. I think in our mind, you have to be $3, $4, $5 billion market cap with a free float north of $1 billion to have equity research coverage, to have institutional support, and to have the maturity to be able to communicate with the market in a way that's understandable and have enough liquidities that small moves in supply and demand of stock don't plummet or cause a massive hike as the one we were seeing and you were just commenting with the other company.
Martin, in the growth equity space at General Atlantic, are the exits in your world typically IPOs, or could they be other types of exits sold to another private equity firm, for example?
That's a great question. Thank you, Tim. If you take the 20-year view, 50% of the time we're exiting to a strategic or to another private equity, typically in a controlled transaction.
That's a lot.
50% is in the public markets.
Okay.
That's the average, and the average, as you know, is always deceiving. In 2019 to 21, it was 80% through the public markets because the markets were very welcoming and, as you said, messy and disorganized, but easy to find liquidity.
Very receptive.
Over the last 3 years, 80% is to strategics. On average, it looks like 50%, but the day-to-day fluctuates a lot.
Wow, that's a lot. I am curious, though, you said about the growth, your portfolio companies are seeing growth of 30 to 40 to 50%. I'm assuming that's year over year?
Year over year.
Year over year. Is that continuing? I'm just curious if there are any kind of markdowns that you're going to have to take because of kind of a reset when it comes to a higher rate environment.
There was a big reset in valuations. So the multiples we're being asked to pay today relative to what we were asked to pay in 2021, 60% below.
Okay.
We've reset to a new reality. Some would say it's overcompensated to the downside. The growth, the engines of growth, which we can talk about what's driving the growth in the portfolio, are undimmed and remain extremely strong. So when I say it was the worst of times, we were talking about the difficulties in going public. It is the best of times because the engine of growth, which is driven primarily by technology, is alive and well, and we're not seeing it, with rare exceptions, any degradation in the growth of the companies.
Martin, when you talk technology, you know, Tim and I talk about this all the time when we have a guest. I mean, technology is a big bucket. What's the technology where you are seeing that 30, 40, 50% growth that you guys are investing in?
If you take a step back, we believe we as a growth equity are benefiting from 3 revolutions. And it's indirectly answering your question. The first revolution is digital transition. More industries are doing more of their interactions with their customers and with the suppliers digitally. It's a trend that's 25 years in the making, now accelerated by AI, truly transformative. That's one driver of growth, and it has to do with the transition to a digital world.
Right.
The second revolution is healthcare innovation. The healthcare system today is not functioning correctly. In the US, for example, and we're global, the US is about 45% of what we do. In the US, healthcare spend has gone from 12% of GDP to 24% of the GDP before the baby boomers get into the really expensive phase of their life from a healthcare perspective. The system, which pays for services, is doing too much service and not enough health. It's only with technology can we get better service at the right place at the right price and improve health spend while reducing costs. Technology has a role to do. At the same time, we believe we're in the golden age of biology. There's a whole revolution happening with biotech. 45% of the disease burden of the world has a biologic solution in clinical trials somewhere in the world. And we're in the very early innings of that revolution, which has got 20 years left.
So it's not necessarily tapping into DNA, but you're talking about companies that already have some kind of solution that they're on the early stages.
On the early stages.
Because we've done a whole story on 23andMe who believe that, you know, we're hoping to kind of, monetize kind of the mapping of the genome, but it just kind of hasn't worked.
This is about therapeutics to address Alzheimer's and cancer and other diseases and Parkinson that probably over the next 20 years we'll figure it out. And that's super exciting. That rate of innovation, now again, turbocharged by AI, is going to happen faster. And for people my age, it's great news. Couldn't come at a better time.
You're thinking the longevity.
Story.
Hey, Martin, what's the common thread that sort of unifies your investments? Like if there's one characterization of a company that you could make that says, okay, well, every one of the companies that I've invested in for growth equity has this one thing.
Entrepreneurial, innovative, global.
Yeah.
So size doesn't matter?
So we start really small. We'll write checks of $25, $50 million of a company that could be growing very fast from a small base. But we try to find people who are having a part in one of these revolutions with a mousetrap that's interesting. It's generating economic value. It's a mousetrap that is defensible, meaning it won't be eroded over time, and it has a team that is ready for the mission.
What's your success rate?
So we lose money 3% of the time. To some extent, 97% of the time we get at least our capital back. 10% of the time we have a blockbuster outcome, and these 10% of deals generate about half of our return.
Wow.
And that's been true for decades. And if I were to reflect what are the common characteristics of those 10%, they share a couple of characteristics. They're going after very large markets.
Just got about 15 seconds. Go ahead.
Okay, large markets, great business model, and good team.
Sorry, I didn't want to.
That's good. You're hired.
I got it.
Yeah, you can work with us. I didn't want to have you cut off. Martin, thank you so much. Look forward to checking in with you again. Martin Escobari, he is co-president and head of global growth equity over at the private equity firm General Electric, joining us here in General Atlantic.
Wow.
GE. Sorry, that was from the past.
headlines on Bloomberg Radio.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. 3:53 on Wall Street, 7 minutes to go ahead of the closing bell. And among the names reporting earnings today after the close of trading will be DocuSign, the electronic document signing company. Right now we have got DocuSign shares ahead of earnings, up by 2%. NVIDIA shares are trading lower, pulling back from that $3 trillion in market cap that it crossed yesterday, joining Microsoft and Apple in that club. Right now, NVIDIA is down 1.1%. By the way, Microsoft, NVIDIA, and Apple combined are now worth more than China's stock market. So just how important is that $3 trillion market cap milestone for NVIDIA? That question this morning from Mandeep Singh, senior tech analyst with Bloomberg Intelligence.
I mean, it's huge in terms of what a chip maker can accomplish. And, you know, we thought back in the day Intel was the best prime for such a feat, but NVIDIA clearly has taken the charge, and they're executing to perfection. Look, it's hard to dispute when you are growing at that scale, you know, 100 billion in data center revenue, expected to do 200 billion in the next 3 years.
Bloomberg's Mandeep Singh. Meanwhile, sources tell Bloomberg the U.S. is opening antitrust investigations into two of the world's most valuable companies, Microsoft and NVIDIA, over their dominance of the rapidly emerging field of artificial intelligence. Microsoft shares are up right now by 0.1%. NVIDIA lower now by 0.9%. Bank of America says semiconductor equipment maker ASML has another 35% upside after hitting a record. ASML ADRs, they're up right now by 1.2%. And those are our top company stories at this hour. I'm Charlie Pellet, and this is Bloomberg.
This is Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Messer and Tim Stenevec on Bloomberg Radio and Television.
It is Bloomberg Business Week, just about 5 minutes from the close of trading and a couple minutes from joining our friends at Bloomberg TV for our cross-platform coverage of the market close. We call it Beyond the Bell. We just heard an update on what equities are doing from Charlie Pellet, but we want to go to a story that's one of the most read stories. Elizabeth Sedgren has been talking about this story for...
She's been like...
Even though it's like, this is a story from today, she's been talking about this for weeks.
I told you about this. I told you. It's just
yeah, she's right.
Because now I feel like it's becoming a little bit of a trend. All right. It is among our most read stories on the Bloomberg. Gets into the University of the Arts in Philadelphia. They abruptly announced last week it would close. The surprise move unleashed a frenzy of other colleges rushing in to nab the suddenly orphaned students. Roughly a dozen schools posted their pitches to UArts students on social media, boasting of incentives that range from automatic admissions, you're in, to steep discounts on tuition and dorms.
Okay, so Ursinus College is a private school with 1,500 students in Collegeville, Pennsylvania. They're offering a 50% discount on its roughly $60,000 tuition to UArts students. Then you got Drexel University. It's about 2 miles away from the shuttered campus in Philly. Point Park is downtown, and they've offered a semester of free housing for as many as 75 students. The list goes on.
Yeah, a spokesperson for LaSalle, which has been experienced its own challenges, according to our reporting team, said there is no limit to the number of students the school can matriculate.
How does that work?
I don't know. I mean, there is a limit.
I guess if it's online, that's but you can't.
There is probably a limit.
Oh, there's a limit to the number of school students a school can enroll, at least if they're physically there.
College of New Jersey extended its application deadline waived fees. My takeaway from this is that these guys are all competing for students. Okay. One would say, some would say that there are just too many institutions out there.
I thought you were going to use the word desperate.
Yeah.
And if you go back and read the story from Nick Carollo and team here at Bloomberg that talks about the challenges that some small private colleges are facing, this probably would not surprise you.
Exactly. So I think there's like this bigger, broader story. There's so many moving pieces to this. The fascinating conversation we just had with Janet Lauren earlier, and then the president over at Bowling Green about, you know, first of all, 50% that weren't graduating. Now they've just gotten a big donation. Now they've got to guarantee that those kids graduate in 4 years. Otherwise, they're kind of on the line for paying back the donors.
When are we going to see that disruption in higher ed?
Bring it on. Bring it on. I'm just going to say, what we are going to bring on right now is the closing bell, folks. Over to our TV colleagues. Beyond the Bell starts now.
Moving closer to those closing bells, we're going to have a full breakdown of all the market action, so don't go anywhere. We're going to take you to the bell and beyond.
Beyond the Bell, Bloomberg comprehensive cross-platform coverage of the U.S. market close starts right now.
And right now, we are 2 minutes away from the end of the trading day. Romaine Bostic alongside Scarlett Fu. We're counting you down to the closing bell. You're here to help take us beyond the bell. It's a global simulcast. We're joined right now by Tim Stenovic, and I believe, if I squint very hard, I have a Carol Masser
I was
sighting.
working yesterday.
Don't get used to this.
I wasn't here, but I was working yesterday.
She's not here tomorrow.
She's not here tomorrow. Okay. All right. Well, let's welcome all of our viewers across our Bloomberg platforms. This is the last time you're going to see Carol Masser this week. On a day where, Carol, you missed a huge rally yesterday, a record rally. NVIDIA topping $3 trillion.
I know.
A bit of a pullback, though, today.
Yeah, I feel like it's kind of limping towards the jobs report tomorrow, and maybe even kind of limping. I do think we're focusing and thinking a lot about what the Fed's going to do next week. After the ECB cut rates as expected, guys, but talked about higher inflation, still trying to get our head around that one to some extent, but I do think we're just kind of counting down to next week.
And tomorrow,
which is why I can take
like
off
you
Friday.
said, 180,000 is the jobs expected to be added according to economists surveyed by Bloomberg. Last month it was 175,000. We'll see what the revisions say. We'll see what the number comes in at. But there are concerns that it could come in a little soft.
And let's not forget, after the jobs report at 8:30 a.m., you've got Roaring Kitty hosting.
Oh my God! See?
I thought we were talking fundamentals
From the
here,
serious
Scarlett.
to
For
the
some people,
craziness.
this is fundamentals. At noon, he's going to be hosting a live, webinar, and he's going to talk through, I guess, his fundamentals for GameStop
Throw
and all
out
those
the
other
rundowns.
stocks.
We've got our new top story.
All right. Well, those shares up about 50% now. In fact, that's one of the few bright spots out there, at least in terms of the big movers. I do think it's interesting, though, to see the pullback today in NVIDIA and Apple, which, of course, have been leading the rally over the last few days. I guess understandable given some of the big gains. Even the kids are loving it today. I guess if you're into the Dow Jones Industrial Average, a gain on the day of about 0.2%, and that is your one bright spot on the day. The S&P 500 lower only by about 1 point, so we'll just basically call it unchanged on the day, 53.53 as we wait for these numbers to settle. The NASDAQ composite is going to finish lower by about 15 points or 0.1%. The Russell 2000, though, that was a more definitive move to the downside, lower by 14 points or about 0.7%.
All right, small caps, as you, I think, pointed out, or did you point out?
I'm sure I did.
Oh, okay, you did. Sorry, I was kind of listening, but I was also looking at some other stuff. All right, so let's go to the S&P 500.
Story of my life.
I appreciate your honesty, Carol.
You and our wife are collaborating. It's kind of an even split. 202 names in the S&P 500 to the upside, gaining ground. 299, almost 300, Scarlett, to the downside, 2 unchanged.
All right, let's take a look at the IMAP and how the indexes, the industry groups within the index performed. Pretty much a mixed picture. Consumer discretionary, that includes your home builders, your automakers, and your retailers, gaining about 1%. Energy also higher with oil prices and consumer staples gaining a third of 1%. The weak links, utilities, industrials, and for change, technology.
All right. Wow. Yeah. Interesting. All right. So let's get to Scarlett. You really laid it out. I'm just going to remind everybody, GameStop, be there or be square tomorrow, and we'll see what is going on. But nonetheless, really an outperformer in today's session, up almost 50% at its highs, finishing the day just shy of a 47% gain. So we'll be looking to see what Keith Gill, Roaring Kitty, what he has to say, what he's doing in terms of his position. So kind of fascinating, to say the least. Lululemon, though, guys, up almost 10% at its highs today. Finishing the day with about a 4.8% gain. This was among your biggest gainers in both the S&P 500 and the NASDAQ 100. Company boosting its earnings per share guidance for the year and reported first quarter profit that topped expectations, and it raised its stock buyback plan by $1 billion. So that's certainly what?
No. The one thing I wanted to mention, excitement over leggings that use hydrogen yarn.
Sorry, I missed that.
I don't
What
get
is that?
I don't know.
Is it hydrogen water?
It's going to cost at least $100, I'm sure.
Okay, of course, and never go on sale. We've all been there.
Yep.
Illumina, also an outperformer today, folks, up about 7.5%. Another one of a top gainer in the S&P 500, NASDAQ 100. Analysts have been weighing in on the news that the company is anticipated to spin off Grail from the company on June 24th, have it listed on the NASDAQ. You might remember European and U.S. regulators opposed the reacquisition of this company, which Illumina founded. Grail has a blood test to detect about 50 types of early stages of cancer. So you have analysts kind of weighing in on that. One more, J.M. Smucker, because I like to say it, up about 4.6%. The company's annual guidance better than feared. At least that's what investors saw. The company sees 2025 adjusted EPS $9.80 to $10.20 a share. The estimate on the street is $10.18. But again, an outperformer in today's session.
Okay, you got the outperformers. I got the underperformers. I do want to start with Vistra Corp, finishing the day down by 6.24%. We did see, I was going to say outages, but they weren't outages. We saw declines across power and electrical equipment companies today. They extended a pullback even as investors bet that the firms will benefit from demand for power fueled by AI and data centers. One of those firms that fell was Vistra Corp, the worst performer on a percentage basis in the S&P 500 today. It was down as much as 9.8%. It did finish off its lows. The stock's still down, though, more than 18% from last week's record close. And shares of Hertz Global Holdings, the parent company of Hertz, falling today after Bloomberg reported that, citing people with knowledge of the matter, that the company is considering the sale of at least $700 million in securitized debt, as a secured debt as well as convertible notes. This an effort to bolster its balance sheet after that EV blunder over the last few years. The company's advisors have begun contacting potential investors regarding the secured debt issue, some of the people said. We should note that no final decisions have been made, and the size and other terms of any financing could change. And then, Romaine, worth checking in on shares of NVIDIA a day after the company hit $3 trillion in market cap. There was a bit of news that the U.S. is opening an antitrust investigation into NVIDIA and Microsoft over their dominance of AI. That's according to people familiar with the matter. NVIDIA shares only fell by 1% today. Doesn't seem like investors really were concerned about this.
Yeah, I mean, now they're down at about the $2.977 trillion market cap. Though we should point out that actually now bumps it back below Apple as a sort of the neck-and-neck horse race between those two companies for our market cap dominance continues. Meanwhile, we go back to the yield space here. We did actually see a reversal from what we had seen the previous 4 days. Yields slightly higher, and I do mean slightly. We're basically barely talking about a basis point here. So honestly, you could just call that unchanged, and I think that gets to this idea here of this holding pattern that I think the markets overall are kind of in. They really want a closer peek here at that monthly U.S. jobs report that we're going to get 8:30 a.m. Tomorrow morning, Carol.
Yeah.
And not just for the read on jobs, but really that read here on inflation as well, where it's going, and whether we're all just kind of sick of talking about it.
Yeah, absolutely, right? There's so many different pieces, wages, and, we want to get an idea of what it all means. I was drawn to a story on the Bloomberg Terminal from our economics team, or Eliza Winger putting it out, and they have basically a high-frequency dashboard. They look at a lot of different metrics. Their bottom line on is that they expect economic momentum to slow in the second half of the year, and they are pointing to different factors, whether it was in the Beige Book and some other sentiment readings, that basically consumers at this point, they're feeling a little bit of a price fatigue, and so maybe pushing back on some of these higher prices, and that ultimately could lead to limitations in terms of what we see with growth here in the United States.
Okay, so here's some of that alternative data. Job postings on Indeed are down 32% from their late 2021 peak. At the current rate of decline, Scarlett, postings will reach their pre-pandemic level by the end of August. So maybe some normalization is happening here.
And of course, everyone's lived experience, right? Spotify prices are going up. My HBO Max is going up. I'm going to have to drop my gym membership because each month they're charging $10 more. And,
well, at what point?
At some point, you just have to get rid of a lot of these things.
You do, but at some point, these companies have to stop making those moves higher, Romaine, because people like Scarlett will stop paying for these.
Well, and it's not just Scarlett. You could put me in that camp as well.
Yeah,
here.
me too.
I'm starting to sort of boycott some things now. I'm just like, you want how much for what?
So we should all go in on a streaming subscription together, I guess.
Yes, absolutely.
Bloomberg
Plus. How about that? We'll all chip in for that. I was curious, though, too. I mean, just on this point about fatigue, too. I mean, there was a story a little bit earlier about Five Below, which ostensibly is kind of a discount retailer. It's kind of a dollar store on steroids. But they're not even performing well, as apparently, like, people are, I guess, over it. I'm not just confused. So are we just not spending on anything?
Well,
we're spending a little lemon.
We know Carol is. Carol's been on vacation, so we know she's spending a lot. But for the rest of us who are here working.
I'm not.
No,
I got a kid in college. But
my condolences.
Exactly. But they talk about it, demand for what is it I didn't know about. Did you guys know about Squishmallows?
I don't know what they are.
What are those?
That was the big gift last Christmas.
All right. These stuffed
for less
animals.
than $5?
Yeah, I don't know, but apparently demand has fallen for them, and so consumers are shifting to things like, go figure, like food and some other important things.
Food.
So sorry, you can't do the Squishmallows, but you do think about these like little luxuries, and that maybe you're not spending on them. What does that say though about?
Can you play with food? You can play with a Squishmallow.
Don't play with
your
your
little
food.
luxuries are
You're not supposed to play
the
with your
services
food.
that you pay for right now. That's a
Yeah.
little luxury, right?
So
Just holding on to it.
Romain's giving up the gym and Netflix, but he's not giving up Squishmallows. Is that what's going on here?
I mean, a man needs
They're
something.
below $5.
A man needs a hobby. Girl. I'm just a simple man. What can I tell you?
Oh, no, not simple, not simple. All right, guys, that's a wrap. And we got to work on making sure that Scarlett gets to keep that gym membership.
See you in a couple weeks. Okay.
All right.
She'll be back Monday.
Oh, man, that does it for the cross-platform coverage. Radio, TV, YouTube, Bloomberg Originals. I'll see you Monday. The rest of the team, sorry, they'll see you tomorrow.
This is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine. Plus, global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Tim Stenevec on Bloomberg Radio.
It is Bloomberg Business Week. Carol, I don't know if you saw this.
What?
Maybe you had time to read it on your 2-hour trip from JFK home yesterday.
I could have knitted everybody a sweater in that time.
New York Magazine's Curbed was out with a piece last week. It had a great headline. The private helicopter to the private jet is the new flying private. So it talks about the increasing number of folks who are taking a car to the West 30th Street helipad here in Manhattan. That chopper is warmed up. It's waiting for them. They make a 5 to 7 minute helicopter ride to Teterboro to catch their private jet. They're cruising over the gridlock below them. I think you were in that gridlock last night.
I definitely was.
Saving 20 minutes to an hour depending on traffic.
I don't know. It sounds pretty magical, Tim.
Yeah, it sounds a lot better than the 2 hours you spent getting from JFK home last night.
Yeah, a lot better.
For a check on private aviation, though, which we should note is off its pandemic peaks.
Right.
We welcome back Janine Yanirelli, founder and president of Par Avion. It's a private aircraft broker that specializes in pre-owned business jets. Janine joins us from the Saratoga Racecourse in Saratoga Springs, New York, where racing is already underway ahead of Saturday's Belmont Stakes. Janine, how are you?
I'm great. How are you all doing today?
Yeah, we're doing well. Welcome back to the program. We'll get to Belmont in a minute, but give us a big picture of how your business is going, given that we are off of pandemic highs when it comes to private aviation.
Well, it's a little bit of the up and down. I hate to use that sort of analogy, but we are in an election year. An election year takes its toll on aircraft sales. The closer we get to that election, the more the market starts to slow down. There's a lot of concern as to what the rules are going to be with the new party that comes in.
So
and I didn't necessarily mean a party. Our political party.
Talk a little bit about that. Does this happen every 4 years? Does it happen when there's a surprise? What's the track record here?
It does. The business jet market does not like surprises. It does not like instability. It doesn't like anything to upset the apple cart. And it does happen every 4 years regardless. And, I wish I could tell you why. It's just that I can tell you that the people in the trade plan for it.
So how is it manifesting in your business right now?
Oh, it's much slower than it was 2 years ago. And even in comparison to last year, I can see that the buyers are being much more cautious before they actually open their purses. They're spending a great deal of time reviewing the asset, and sometimes they get really close and then they back themselves up, and we just have to wait them out.
I don't understand, because we, fairly regularly talk about the wealthy are getting wealthy. And I'm not just talking about billionaires, but I'm just talking about in general. And so I'm trying to understand. Remind us who, Janine, in general, is your typical buyer.
Now, for me, the classic buyer is an entrepreneur, self-made. They've built their business. They've sold their business. They're independently wealthy. That's the big bulk of my personal business. A portion of that is also corporate. Now, corporate's perhaps a bit more consistent because they look to turn their aircraft over every 5 to 7 years because they want to have warranty coverage for the aircraft. They don't want any surprises either. But that comes more from the operational side.
And is it American buyers or global buyers? Like, I'd love any kind of geographic color you can give us.
Well, this is, I would say, more specific to the United States. I mean, we're the largest marketplace in the world for business aircraft. And the drivers for why people acquire aircraft here are a little bit different than the rest of the world. We also are one of the most friendly environments for operating aircraft privately.
The U.S. is?
Yes, absolutely. And one of the big reasons for that is the airspace, the available airspace, the ability to fly direct from point to point. The airspace is so tightly congested. Let's just take Europe, for example, or regulated, that you have to get a slot for arrivals and departures in most of the airport, particularly at very busy times of the year. It's a deterrent to operating your aircraft freely, and we are the essence of freedom here in the United States.
Who's been selling aircraft? Who's been looking to offload?
Well, I wouldn't use the word offload because I don't see people dumping their aircraft. What you're seeing is a transition. People who tested the market in the pandemic, who bought small jets, are actually looking to upgrade. Okay. So I have a number of inquiries based on the airplanes that I have that are going from small jets to medium to large cabin.
In terms of, you talked about the typical client you have, the entrepreneur, the person who sells their business, is self-made, is independently wealthy. What do they then go do with that aircraft? The question that I have is, are they 100% flying on it themselves, or are they leasing it out or chartering it to other folks when they're not using it?
So I think the perspective that most of the buyers today take is, what's the easiest way to place the aircraft into service and continue that service? And generally that would be a management company as opposed to an independent flight department. And when you're with a management company, there's usually the added benefit of saying, would you like to charter the airplane? And I would say that the vast majority of people who have aircraft under manage will certainly agree to also chartering.
Go ahead. No,
are they chartering, when the management company is managing it, do they handle everything, including pilots, or do you have the same pilots all the time?
No, everything. Well, that's an arrangement you have to make with the management company. But generally, yes, you can specify that you would like flight crew to stick with your airplane.
Asking for a friend.
Asking for a friend. That's good to know.
Influencer.
I want to know that friend.
Yeah.
How much of what you're doing, though, it sounds like you said individual, like entrepreneurs and so on and so forth. How much work do you do with actually corporations and companies?
You know, my personal business, it's probably about 25% with corporate. And I represent a couple corporations at this particular time who will remain nameless in the acquisition of aircraft. They are actually modifying their fleet. They buy new aircraft, but they supplement that uplift with a pre-owned airplane.
What's the most popular size aircraft right now that you're selling?
Right now, you know, I don't have it, but the most popular is the small jet. The market, it has an appetite for the small airplane, 6 to 8 passengers. I have super mid-size and large cabin airplanes, and the buyers right at the moment are far and few between.
Wow. Okay, so give us the price range for a small to mid-size versus the super heavies.
So the small, you're probably looking at 3 to 8 million, maybe a little bit more the newer the aircraft. The super mid-size, depending on the age of the airplane, anywhere from 7 to 15, 16, 17 million. And then the large jet category, again, age is a big influencer in terms of the price point, but let's talk about newer aircraft, newer being 15 years or newer, and we're probably 20 million and up.
Yeah. But as I say, it's not the initial purchase, it's the upkeep.
Hey, yeah, that management company, and they're just
carrying costs.
Yeah.
I'm just going to say,
chartering it out.
I'm just skipping out there. Carol? I'm just saying, or so I hear. The Belmont Stakes, tell us a little bit about the weekend and the amount of activity that you're seeing of people, you know, chartering a private jet to go up and see the race.
Well, so I hear, and just like any major sporting event, you should see an uptick in the traffic into the greater area, Albany, Saratoga. I went by the Saratoga airport earlier today, and they looked busy in the sense of people arriving, dropping their passengers, and moving on. There weren't a whole lot of airplanes parked there, but the ramp space is pretty limited, and especially because they have some construction going on. But the area airports are prepared for an influx that, you know, you'll see 100% increase in travel. And the Belmont Stakes Festival kicks off today, as you can see from the background and the activity.
You seen any races yet?
Oh, yes.
You won any money yet?
I'm ahead for the moment.
Okay, enough to buy a maybe small jet.
Oh, I can't even buy a cocktail here with what I won.
All right, Seize the Gray, Resilience. Do you have a favorite?
I have to go with Seize the Gray. First of all, I'm partial grays. That's the color of most of the horses that I've owned personally. Who doesn't love D. Wayne Lucas? I mean,
love it.
A legend in the business. And, a
Got
rookie
it.
basically jockey. Got to go with Seize the Gray.
I'm looking at odds 8-1. We will see what happens. Janine Iannarelli joining us, founder and president of Par Avion, on site at the Saratoga Racecourse in Saratoga Springs, New York. Races this weekend. This is Bloomberg.
It's 4:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. After the close of trading, we heard from DocuSign, the stock now lower by 4.9% after the online signature services company forecast billings for the second quarter that did fall short of the average analyst estimate. DocuSign again right now trading lower. DocuSign today down by 4.9%. Mixed day for the U.S. stock market ahead of the jobs report tomorrow morning. Little changed on the S&P, down 1 point, ending the Thursday session at 53.52, lower by less than 0.1%. Dow Industrials up 78 gain of 0.2%. NASDAQ Composite Index down 14, a decline of just about 0.1%. 10-year yield 4.28% with a 2-year yielding 4.72%. Spot gold today up 0.7%, 23.78.72 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude today up by 2%, 75.54. Bitcoin now lower by 0.8%, back below 71,000, 70,615 right now on Bitcoin. Again, recapping, mixed day for the market ahead of the jobs report. S&P down 1 point, drop there of less than 0.1%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business.
$2 trillion to its market value just since November. For some context, Carol, that $2 trillion that it's added is more than the market cap of all but 7 companies in the S&P 500.
That's context and perspective.
That's just the market cap that it's added in the last few months.
Cray, anyone?
Some people think it is.
Although some would say there are fundamentals there, too.
Well, analysts are still really bullish on it. It's got 65 buys, 7 holds, and 0 sells, according to data compiled by Bloomberg. So a lot of bulls out there. Our next guest, not one of them. In fact, he likens NVIDIA in 2024 to Cisco in the year 2000. Just a reminder, a little history lesson. Cisco stock dove close to 90% in the dot-com bubble.
I think Kathy Wood has also written about that in terms of Cisco.
Cisco, yeah, but
right.
She got out of NVIDIA and she's missed this run-up.
She did. All right, so back with us is Jared Dillian. He's the editor and publisher of the market newsletter, The Daily Dirt Nap, a former Bloomberg opinion columnist, also the author of several books, including his newest, No Worries, How to Live a Stress-Free Financial Life, which we have had fun going through and talking about. He joins us in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker studio. Great to have you back. How are you?
It's great to be back. Thank you.
So let's start with NVIDIA.
Yeah.
Why do you think it's a bubble?
Gee whiz, look at the chart.
But just because the chart goes up,
it's gone parabolic. So let me give you something for context. So you said Cisco went down 90% in 2000.
Right.
If NVIDIA goes down 75%, which I think it had close to a drawdown like that before in 2022, if it had a 75% drawdown, it would still be a $750 billion company, which is incredible. So the way I look at this is you've had narrowing market leadership, okay? So when I had started my career in 1999, I was actually on the options exchange in San Francisco, and you had a number of stocks that were leading, and it became narrower and narrower, and you had one stock left. It was Cisco. They missed on earnings. I think it was like March 11th of 2000, and then it was down from there. 6 months ago, people were talking about the Magnificent Seven.
Right.
And then it became the Magnificent Four, and now there's one stock left, and that is the definition of narrowing breadth. The interesting thing about this is that the median PE of non-tech companies is not expensive. If you look at the non-tech part of the S&P,
right,
it's actually not super expensive. It's the tech part that makes it overvalued. So.
Okay, so what would you say to the folks who come out and say, well, NVIDIA's got a real moat, there's real demand for its chips and what it provides. Look no further than the backlog and the companies that are lining up to buy it. So there is a story there that it's fundamentally worth this much.
I mean, revenue is expected to grow about 100% year over year.
Yeah.
In 2025. Now, mind you, in 2024, it was a lot more. I'm just looking, actually, this is quarter to quarter. But anyway, I'm just saying, it's still it's a doubling of revenue.
Yeah, I mean, the same was also true of Cisco in 2000. And when it got to the peak, you had to say, how many routers do they have to sell in order to make this valuation worthwhile? And it was just an astronomical number. So, the pushback I get in NVIDIA, and by the way, I'm not short NVIDIA. I'm not suicidal, right? Like, I don't.
Do you own NVIDIA?
No, I don't own it either.
In an index fund?
I guess technically I do.
Okay.
Yeah. So, but the pushback I get all the time is revenue growth, revenue growth, revenue. But if you look at the second derivative of that, when that turns, that's when it's vulnerable. Look, when I talk to young people, former students of mine, former interns, stuff like that, and I ask them what stocks they all own NVIDIA. It is a consensus stock. Everybody owns it. You know, I've seen this before.
That's worrisome to you.
Yeah.
Hey, speaking of bubbles, you've written a lot on Twitter and in your newsletter recently about private equity. You think it's in a bubble. You recently wrote that you don't think private equity will be the cause of the next crisis, but it will greatly exacerbate it and prolong the pain over a period of years. What are you seeing in private equity that you don't think others see?
You know, private equity made sense in the 2010s when you could buy companies at 4 or 5 times and interest rates were 0. I mean, it made sense to buy cheap companies and lever up.
Right.
But now they're buying companies at 10 to 12 times and interest rates are 5.5%. It makes a lot less sense. There are 17,300 private equity firms in the United States. And they're all competing for deals. They're rolling up every asset imaginable, whether it's pizza parlors or bowling alleys or minor league baseball teams. It's really reached the point of saturation, and there's so much competition for deals that they're getting more and more overvalued. Plus, there's no exits. People have written about that before. There's no IPOs, there's no acquisitions, there's no exits. There was an article written the other day about, I can't remember the context, but basically someone in private equity said they predicted the next decade is going to be pretty rough.
Scott Kleiman, Apollo Global Management, Scott Kleiman said the private equity industry must face up to the reality of lower valuations. Everything is not going to be okay. And that was our Bloomberg story that he put out there. He did a session at Super Return International in Berlin. So, like, they've been weighing in on this. I mean, it is kind of interesting, right? What works in a zero-rate environment? It's like when the tide goes out, right?
Yeah.
You get to see everything. And, I mean, we have been spoiled for, 2 decades or so of really cheap, no cost in terms of leveraging up, right? Money has been so cheap. It's very different in an environment that even if historically it's low percentage-wise, it's still a different investing environment.
It's a completely different investing environment. And, you know, I don't know the path of interest rates in the future, but private equity is very vulnerable to rising interest rates. Let's say we had, after the election, we have a resurgence of inflation. Inflation goes back to 6%.
Right.
10-year yields go from 4.5 to 5.5 or 6. You're going to see the big private equity firms, they'll be down 30% on them.
Because of taking markdowns in their investments, or
Yes.
just because of companies that just can't survive in a higher rate environment?
That
So when
too.
they go to refinance or whatever, they're like, I can't do this.
Yeah.
Okay, play this out for us, though. And maybe someone listening or watching right now would say, you know what, if a private equity firm or if private equity goes bust, that doesn't really affect me because I don't own any private equity. I don't have a portion of my portfolio in private equity. What are the implications of you think a bubble in private equity?
Well, one of the things you started off with, you read from my newsletter, and you said, I said that private equity wouldn't be the cause of the downturn, but it would exacerbate it. Private valuations should mirror public valuations. So if we have, say, a 20% drawdown in the S&P, then correspondingly there should be a 20% drawdown in private valuations. So the question is that whether with 10-year lockups, private equity can earn that out over time,
right?
Or there is a liquidity event. And the one thing about markets is that liquidity always finds a way.
Well, it's also, if you're working, like we did the story about, the plumber who sold out, the star plumber in UK who sold out to a private equity fund, made a lot of money, but kind of sorry that he did it. And ultimately we talk about, private equity kind of going into all these markets. But if a company in a zero rate environment or cheap, cost of money environment versus where we are today, higher for longer or high for longer, if that business can't survive, well, then you think about the business closing down, people losing jobs. Like, that's what I think about, the shutting down of businesses. That starts to have a serious economic impact.
By the way, the first time I really heard about this was my brother has a very interesting job. He is a broker for dental practices. So he helps dentists transition when they're retiring, and a young dentist will buy the practice. As of about 5 years ago, he was selling all of his practices to private equity, and they were paying like 12 times for dental practices. And since interest rates went up, valuations have come down a little bit, but they're still like 10 times for dental practices. So.
Wow, you think about...
Hope those private equity guys know how to fill cavities. That's all I'm saying.
No, but you do think, right? They look at the balance sheet, right? The money coming in, the insurance, and like I get kind of why they find it interesting, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Hey, we got 30 seconds left, and then we're going to come back with you. Give us 30 seconds on why you think payrolls are going to be are going to come in under tomorrow.
We've had kind of a run of bad data, especially the labor market data. I mean, the JOLTS was kind of a mess. And, I mean, Chicago PMI was a complete, what's that?
We're going to debate. Keep going.
Okay. I mean, Chicago PMI was complete. I would say over the last 2 weeks, the data has become significantly softer.
Softer,
ADP
but not a
came in
mess.
The Chicago PMI was pretty much a mess. 35.4 is like deep recession territory. So I'm a bear, sorry.
That's okay.
Okay.
That's okay. I mean, we have had an inverted yield curve for a long time.
Yes,
right?
for 2 years.
So, like, at some point,
I'm in between you guys. I'm gonna let this continue after we do some news. We're talking to Jared Dillian of the Daily Dirt Amp, also the author of No Worries: How to Live a Stress-Free Financial Life. More with him in just a few minutes, though. Before that, a check on the latest world and national news with Amy Morris in the Bloomberg 99.1 newsroom in Washington, D.C. Hey, Amy.
Hey, Tim. Steve Bannon is was a longtime advisor to former President Trump. Well, now he's been ordered to start serving a 4-month jail sentence by July 1st for contempt of Congress after his appeal of a 2022 conviction failed.
There's not a prison built or a jail built that will ever shut me up.
A jury found Bannon guilty of contempt for refusing to testify and hand over documents to the congressional committee that's investigating the January 6, 2021 Capitol riot. Boeing space taxi docked with the International Space Station, bringing the spacecraft's first 2 passengers to the orbiting laboratory, part of a critical flight test for NASA. NASA Watch editor Keith Cowing on the importance of this mission.
After we lost the Space Shuttle Columbia, we were depending on the Russians, and NASA thought that wasn't a good idea, and they decided to go commercial with this. So now we have a redundant ability to put people into space, Americans into space on the space station. Do not need the Russians.
Keith Cowing speaking with Bloomberg's Joe Matthew. And today's docking is a key moment for Boeing's Starliner. It suffered numerous delays, technical difficulties, and setbacks. This test mission was pushed back by 7 years. Israel bombed a school in central Gaza, claiming that Hamas militants were operating from inside. That school was run by the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees. More than 30 people were killed, mostly women and children. It is the latest instance of mass casualties among Palestinians trying to find refuge as Israel expands its offensive. And it's decision day at the Supreme Court. The justices ruled on 3 cases related to estate taxes on stocks, tribal health care, and asbestos claims. The High Court has more than 30 more cases to decide before this month is over, including former President Trump's immunity claims from criminal prosecution. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris, and this is Bloomberg.
4:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We had a mixed finish for the U.S. stock market today. The Dow higher ahead of the jobs report, up 78 points, up 0.2%. S&P 500 index, though, little changed on the day, down 1.5352, a drop there of less than 0.1%, while NASDAQ was down 14, a drop of 0.1%. 10-year yield 4.28%, with a 2-year yielding 4.72%. Spot gold up $18 the ounce, up 0.8%, $23.73 for an ounce of the precious metal, while West Texas Intermediate crude oil today rallied 2%, $75.58 for a barrel of WTI. Well, as for the market backdrop ahead of tomorrow morning's jobs report, Tracy McMillian is head of global asset allocation at Wells Fargo Bank.
The reliance of the market on just a few names means that there's probably some risk here. And so, we're telling investors it's probably a good idea to rebalance, avoid some portfolio equity concentration in those sectors that have done so well, like technology.
And today, speaking of technology, the NASDAQ 100 index was down just under 0.1%. After hours, keeping an eye on DocuSign. Stock is down 6.3% after the online signature services company forecast billings for the second quarter that fell short of the average analyst estimate. Again, recapping here, stocks ended the day mixed. The Dow higher by 0.2%. S&P 500 index will call that flat on the day. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right. Thank you so much, Charlie, teeing up to tomorrow's monthly jobs report. I want to get back to our guest, Jared Dillian, still with us. He's the editor and publisher of the market newsletter. It is called The Daily Dirt Nap. He's a former Bloomberg Opinion columnist, also the author of several books, including his newest, No Worries, How to Live a Stress-Free Financial Life, which we have talked about in the past, and we highly recommend you check out our podcast feed for that conversation. Jared, we were talking about before we took a break to do some news about the job market and your expectations. We talked earlier with our Rich Miller, who pointed out that the U.S. job market may be a lot less vibrant than the Fed believes to seem to think it is. And he talked about the quarterly census of employment and wages, these new figures that have come out that says maybe payrolls have grown about 60,000 less per month on average last year than the roughly 250,000 run rate. So there's some debate about whether or not these statistics are actually showing the labor market that maybe it's not really as strong as it is. Talk a little bit more about your concerns, or specifically why you think the labor market is maybe starting to come undone.
Well, I think, do you remember back during the pandemic when we had the labor shortages, right?
Yeah.
When you would go into a restaurant and they would only be serving like 4 tables because people weren't showing up to work. Like there was just so many jobs available versus the number of job seekers. And that was a distortion that was caused as a result of the massive amount of stimulus that we pumped into the economy. And I think what's happening is that has taken 4 years to unwind. And I think it's finally unwinding after 4 years. So if you look at a chart of job openings.
So the shortages are finally unwinding?
Yes,
okay.
yes. So if you look at a chart of job openings, you're seeing it's coming back down to pre-pandemic levels. So I think really the equilibrium rate for the unemployment rate is 4.5% to 5%. And I think we'll get there over the next 6 to 12 months.
You want to talk private credit?
I do want to talk private credit.
I'm going to give you a chance to do
Just
that
like
before I get to my
So we talked a lot about private equity and your concerns
retail
there.
investor questions.
Private credit, Tim and I know, like we've, been at Milken, and it's like everybody's in private credit. It's all good. The risk is spread around. What do you think? And why?
I am thinking about, here's the thing. We haven't really had a credit cycle, the down half of a credit cycle, since 2008. We had a credit bear market in 2002. We had a credit bear market in 2008. We almost had one during the pandemic, but the Fed started buying corporate bond ETFs, and they basically jawboned the credit markets higher. So we really haven't had a downturn in credit in 16 years. And bear markets in credit are awesome. They're great. If you are an income investor, you can get investment grade bonds at 8 to 10% yields. You can get high yield at 14% yields.
Right.
It is like, I've been waiting for an environment like that for a long time. And I think that if private credit comes unglued, like I said before about private equity, correspondingly, it should match with the public markets. I think we might get that opportunity. So,
what is that unwinding, or what does that scenario look like? Does it look like a GFC? What does it look like?
I don't know what it looks like. I don't think it looks like a financial crisis, but if we are overdue for a bear market in credit, we have built up a lot of excesses over time. So
there's a lot of money. There's still a lot of liquidity out there.
1.8 trillion in private credit. It's a lot. So
okay.
TBD.
Let's talk GameStop and Roaring Kitty. Sure. Keith Gill is going to do a YouTube tomorrow.
He is?
Yeah.
Yes.
This is breaking in the last couple hours.
Okay.
So you argue that what's happening when it comes to GameStop is market manipulation. You acknowledge you're not a lawyer, but you think that Roaring Kitty, what he's doing, should be looked at by regulators.
So the pushback I get from people on this is, well, he's not really doing anything different than Bill Ackman or Muddy Waters or Hindenburg. He builds up a position, he announces the position, and then it moves in his favor, right? But the way I look at this is that it really comes down to intent. When Bill Ackman does it, there's an investment thesis behind it. There's like a core investment thesis that's based on fundamentals and facts. His intent is specifically to manipulate the stock higher. So like I said, I'm not a lawyer. I don't really understand securities law, but if the SEC allowed this to happen, just from a philosophical standpoint, imagine that there were 100 people doing this or 1,000 people doing this, and the market was manipulated in many different ways. Like, that's not really a result that you would want to have. So,
could he not just be buying it because he likes it?
I mean, that would that would be his defense for sure. I mean, and that's what he said in front of Congress when he was zooming in to that congressional hearing. He said, "I like the stock," and that was basically his defense. But
I mean, where's everybody else who's following? Are they doing their institutional research or fundamental research? Because some would say the institutional guys got involved because they were wanted a piece of the action. Now, were they doing their fundamental research when they were potentially chasing it?
Absolutely not.
So it's where do you go with this?
Yeah. I mean, good for GameStop, obviously, but 90% of the people who follow them will end up losing money. So
I want to spend a couple minutes on the book.
Oh, yeah.
We have a couple minutes left.
Yep.
If you joined us last time or heard last time, you know that Jared and his wife have separate bank accounts. They keep everything separated. It's the key to a happy marriage. Never lend money to family members. These are just a couple of the lessons in the book, which both Carol and I loved. I don't think we talked about the awesome portfolio last time you were on.
Yeah.
Talk about what this is. It's this portfolio construction that you say is kind of bulletproof.
So the conventional wisdom for retail investors is that you put all your money in the S&P 500 and you ride out the volatility, and at the end you have a big pile of money, right? The problem is when you invest in an index, you get the returns of the index, which are very, very good, but you also get the volatility of the index.
Yeah.
S&P 500 is very volatile. Like in an average year, it'll move 15 to 20% up and down. So what that causes you over a 40-year investing career is a lot of ups and downs, sometimes a lot of heartache, and sometime in that 40-year investing career, you will have a bear market that exceeds 50% or more, right? You will see your life savings cut in half. Now, what the awesome portfolio does is it takes 5 asset classes, stocks, bonds, gold, cash, and real estate, and it splits them into 20% portions. This portfolio returns about 1% less than the S&P 500 with almost half the volatility.
Wow, that's a big change.
And the drawdowns are much lower. So the worst drawdown in the history of the awesome portfolio has been 12%. Okay. In 2008, the S&P 500 was down 38%. The awesome portfolio was down 9%. So if you say the worst year I can possibly have in my investing career is down 12%, that is the kind of volatility you can ride out.
So is that actuality or just back testing? You just got about 20.
No, that's historical. That's
historical.
Yeah.
There's a whole chapter in the book about the awesome portfolio.
This is why we wanted to bring him back. It's just such fun to get his perspective. Jared, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Jared Dillian, editor and publisher of the market newsletter, The Daily Dirt Nap, his book, No Worries, How to Live a Stress-Free Financial Life. separate bank accounts too. Husband and wife.
The key to a happy marriage. According to Jared,
Yes.
This is Bloomberg.
company news headlines on Bloomberg Radio.
From Bloomberg World headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. DocuSign shares now down 4.5% after hours after the online signature services company forecast billings for the second quarter that did fall short of the average analyst estimate. DocuSign, by the way, is boosting its buyback program by up to $1 billion after our shares down 4.5%. There's a new name in the $3 trillion club. NVIDIA, the AI chip darling, added about $1.8 trillion to its market value this year and now trails only Microsoft as the world's most valuable company. But can that momentum continue? Mandeep Singh covers tech for Bloomberg Intelligence.
That's where I think there's a question mark when you compare the Microsoft's, $200 billion in revenue, which is a recurring revenue, versus an NVIDIA that is going to do $100 billion in data center revenue. But everyone agrees with that there's no guarantee it's going to be a recurring revenue because in the end, it comes down to CapEx spend. So 40% of NVIDIA's $100 billion in revenue comes from 5 players who are spending their CapEx. Now, are they going to keep growing their CapEx 30, 40%, which is what is baked into the estimates? Time will tell.
Bloomberg's Mandeep Singh, and today NVIDIA shares did decline, down 1.2%, putting the company below that $3 trillion market cap. Sources tell Bloomberg, meanwhile, the U.S. is opening antitrust investigations into Microsoft and NVIDIA over their dominance of the rapidly emerging field of artificial intelligence. Microsoft shares today up by 0.1%. Bank of America says ASML has another 35% upside after hitting a record today. ASML was up by 1.1%. Those are our top company stories, and this is Bloomberg.
You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Messer and Tim Stenevec on Bloomberg Radio and Television.
It's my Friday. It's
Talk more about it, Carol.
Doug Krisner's Friday.
Hey, I'm the odd man out, as they say.
Sorry, Tim. We're getting ready to wrap up the Thursday edition of Bloomberg Business Week. But joining us is, of course, Doug Krisner, getting ready for Daybreak Asia. You are getting ready to wrap up your week.
Indeed. So, welcome back. How was Nashville?
It was great. I unfortunately am really sad that I was not even there 24 hours, so I really didn't get to
did you go anywhere but the convention?
That would be a no.
Oh.
So you didn't get a vibe on the local economy? Because I hear it's booming.
I didn't get it much, but I feel like everybody's moving south. Like that I felt. This was a tourism place, but it's also a conference place for like business things. I saw like families there with their kids coming in.
I heard there was a water park.
There's a water park. Ask Paul Sweeney about that one.
How come every time Paul Sweeney goes on a...
We went to one in Texas for
Paul Sweeney was there, and there was a water park there, too. And I think his flight was delayed a day, and I think he spent the day at the water park.
It's really fascinating because Gaylord Entertainment apparently owns all of these. They own the Grand Ole Opry.
There's one in Denver, too. Okay.
It's just interesting, kind of the investment story. And I think Paul was actually involved years ago in maybe helping them
it all comes full circle, right?
So it's
all
fascinating.
Comes full circle.
What I will say is that a great panel with Jenny Jones of Franklin Templeton and Hanneke Smits of BNY Mellon. We talked about a lot of things in terms of some of what's going on in the macro. And I feel like the globalization stuff that we talk about, that's a real concern. Politics, geopolitics. Hanneke Smith talked about what's going on in the UK right now, and that the pushback on globalization, bringing nearshoring, friendshoring, onshoring, whatever you want to call it, some of this stuff comes with higher costs. Climate change
it probably
as well.
does, yeah.
And so we need to think about this higher for longer, high for longer environment and what that means.
Inflationary environment, is that what you're talking about?
A higher,
Okay,
a higher rate, where we don't necessarily go back to
the rates that we knew before the pandemic. Yeah, I think that's probably a safe bet. We're going to learn a lot more, obviously, tomorrow.
Yeah.
With the employment data,
Yeah.
right? But the bond market has been holding up remarkably well, and the equity market likewise. So
feels like it's marking time right now, the equity market, a little bit.
I just wonder, I mean, so much of this AI trade, and you saw the fact that now the U.S. Department of Justice and the Federal Trade Commission are going to go after Microsoft and NVIDIA, antitrust issues here. So a lot of the enthusiasm around AI may be tempered a bit by this. I don't know. Maybe it's a long shot. What?
Okay, so what? Microsoft today closed, pretty much flat on the day after this news came out. NVIDIA was barely down over 1%. So we didn't see a big reaction from this antitrust news.
Yet.
But I mean,
I mean, look at what's been going on with Alphabet. I mean, they've been under the microscope for a while, and that hasn't been completely resolved at this point.
Does that change come November?
It may.
Like, that's one of the other things, I think.
But the other thing, too, to consider, if there's a new administration after the election in November, maybe all this goes away anyway. So it's a moot point. And maybe, to your point, that's why there's been very little market reaction. I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud.
It's not like Republicans have great things to say about quote-unquote big tech. If it were
segments of big tech, I think the social media landscape is really, one of the things that a lot of the conservatives have been very upset about, the degree to which there may be a little bit of unconscious bias happening in that space.
The interesting thing in AI, too, and you do wonder, NVIDIA, they just were ahead of the curve. Like, so are
so
they being,
much so.
And as more competition comes, so is it early in the game to start being concerned in terms of antitrust? And do you with AI assume that some of the big players are going to only have the deep pockets in order to build out the data centers in order to support it?
And that's the point, right? When you get so much concentration, that's a concern, I would think, on the part of regulators.
Where were they maybe 10 years ago if they were really so concerned about the growing
might? This stuff is moving so quickly, it's hard to predict. It's hard for the government to get out in front and regulate it, if regulation is the right
So I got a solution.
remedy.
You and I just take tomorrow off, okay?
Well, let's do that.
Okay.
Well, Doug's not working tomorrow. You're actually counts as a day off for you, Carol. So
what are you going to do?
Got stuff.
All right. We'll do do stuff.
Hopefully it's fine.
I may talk about congestion pricing on air, but my stuff I keep private. All right, guys, have a good and safe evening from Tim and me. Do not go anywhere. Of course, Doug coming up later on. And Balance of Power starts now.
From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. I'm Joe Matthew. President Biden decries isolationist politics during an address from Normandy, marking the 80th anniversary